This is Stephen Palmer and Sandy Russo in Sandy's apartment in Greenwich Village. This is March 14th, 2018, and we are here to discuss, it's the Stonewall Project, but to discuss Sandy's life and the times. And so let's just start with some quick questions. Sandy, what year were you born?
1940.
1940. Where were you born?
I was born in a hospital on Staten Island, and it was actually connected with a home for unwed mothers. My mother was not married, and she was shipped off, to have this baby, and hopefully never see it again. That was her parents' wishes, but it didn't work out that way. She was not willing to, have me sent off for adoption, and ultimately I lived with her and her parents, my grandparents.
You lived on Staten Island?
No, they lived in Brooklyn, and that's where I was in foster care for a while. But then when I was 5, I moved into the house that she shared with her twin sister and her brother, who was off at the war, and her parents.
Okay. As the years went on, were there any siblings?
No.
Okay. And what religion were you brought up in?
None. Very staunchly atheist. My grandparents were Jews from Russia, and they were strict communists, had no time for God or the synagogue, but they were very culturally Jewish. They spoke Yiddish, we ate Jewish foods, there was a very a culturally enriched household.
How was your relationship with your mom and your...
My mother died about 4 years ago, and it was never quite close, but there was a lot of history that we don't want to go into now.
Okay, very good. Your schooling, friends, any interesting stories you'd like to share with us?
I went to Brooklyn Public Schools that I was just talking to my wife about last night, about how good our education was back then. It was very rigid, and everybody learned the same thing, but you learned how to count and divide and read and where to put the commas. So I went to public schools. I went to high school in Brooklyn, Lincoln High School. And then I sort of went off to college and didn't like college and kind of flunked out, and came back to New York and studied acting for a while at the Herbert Berghoff studio here in the West Village. And sort of floated around. I had gone to Boston University, and there I met Joan Baez, who was a friend for a little while, and she and I hung out. And when I left school, I ultimately went out to Big Sur, where she was living, and we hung out for about 10 months, and then I returned to New York, and our relationship ultimately, fizzled as she went one way and I went another.
That's fascinating. I'm going to her farewell tour at Beacon Theater, September 21st. What year are we talking about?
We're talking about 1960. And she had just met Bob Dylan. She was living with another guy at the time in Big Sur, and I was living with a guy. And then she met Bob Dylan and got more involved with him. I had already returned to New York. We kept touch for a few years, and then sort of it, fizzled.
Has there been any connection with Joan since then?
No, that was that.
Okay. Do you remember, can you talk to me about your first feelings of sexual desire for women?
Oh, that wasn't until much later. Unfortunately, I was in my 30s. I was about 38. I was always a little tomboy and mistaken for a lesbian later on, as I got older. But I was sort of too terrified to explore it, because when I was hanging out in the Village in the 60s, we hung out like at Washington Square Park, and there were the folk singers and the guitars, and later a lot of anti-war stuff. And the lesbian couples that I observed in the village were very off-putting for me. I don't know if this is an unfair portrayal, but it was a portrayal of like a perception of a 17, 18-year-old. There was a very sort of macho, the bull dyke, and on her arm was this very frilly, crinolined woman, and they were going to either the Fat Black Pussycat or one of the women's clubs, and I couldn't identify with either one of those people in those relationships. I wasn't that butch and masculine, and I certainly wasn't that feminine and dolled up, and so I didn't know, to the extent that I even let myself think about it. It's scary, and I don't know how to just sort of handle it, how to grasp it. And so I was sort of a tortured little dyke. I married twice to men, happily, though not so happily because both ended in divorce. But it wasn't until during the late 60s, there was a whole issue about grand juries. They were hauling in people from political organizations into grand juries, making them talk. Who do you work with? What are you doing? Who published this pamphlet? And so there was a lot of political activity about stopping the grand jury, refusing to testify at grand juries, educating people about the grand jury. And at the same time, when some of these political trials were starting, the New York 21, Panther 21 here in New York, there were jury consultants who helped the lawyers basically figure out what kind of jurors they should have for these political trials, who would be sympathetic to these defendants. Political radicals, black power folks, Latinos, who were getting caught up in the justice system. And so around that project, the grand jury project, they had an office, they published materials to folks, they disseminated, informational packets wherever they could go. They often worked with related legal folks. And they had a seminar out in Asilomar, California. And I think it was, I can't remember the year. But most of them who worked for the jury project were lesbians. Smart, dedicated, tough, and I was very much drawn to them. I knew them as friends. I was working in the same kind of political arena, and I went to this conference and realized I'm a lesbian and I should just get over it. And
what year is this about?
This is about, 1977, maybe 78. And had a relationship with a woman that I had gone to law school with. And then we worked together at the Legal Aid Society. I was a criminal defense lawyer for a little while. I had gone to law school because of the political trials going on at the time and wanted to be a part of that community and thought I needed skills to do something. I had gone to Cuba in 1971, and it was then I realized I needed tools. So I went back to college and then to law school. I got out of law school, I guess, in 78 and realized, I needed tools to bring about the change I wanted to see in this country. And I thought being a lawyer was part of that.
Let's back it up into the 60s again. Could you talk about the political activities you were involved in at that time?
It was a lot of anti-war, Vietnam, a lot of that. And I was involved in a women's group. I helped start it with a whole bunch of other women called the Madam Bin Brigade. She was a Vietnamese. She was at the Paris Peace Talks. She was an important figure in Vietnam. So we had this Madame Binh Brigade, and we did all sorts of demonstrations. We took over a radio studio in one episode, where we were going to, speak to what was going on around the war. And then, it was the free speech movement. It was out in San Francisco, and everywhere, everything was happening. There was a women's movement. There was, all this political stuff. There was Black Power and the Panthers. There were the Young Lords. And as white folks, we thought that our role was to be supportive of those organizations, that Black Panthers, the Young Lords, whatever, that they were the ones who, set the message, set the agenda in a sense, articulated what they wanted, what their demands were. And the role for some of us, at least, in the movement was to be supportive, that they were to take the lead, and they deserved to take the lead, and we had to learn from them and be supportive. So there was there was a Black Panther who was arrested in New Haven, Erica Huggins. So there were marches and demonstrations and fundraising, for her legal defense. And, Angela Davis, it was Free Angela. And so that was the role that the group of people I was involved, took.
What kind of work did you do during what did you do for money?
Well, from 71,
60s.
In the 60s, I just had schlock jobs. I was like a secretary and office stuff and nothing very interesting. And then I went to a college on Staten Island. It was pretty cheap. I was a teacher's assistant, and I did some teaching myself and remedial skills out there that I got paid for. And through law school, I had part-time jobs and, just sort of hobbled it together. I didn't live a very fancy life. And then I got my job at the Legal Aid Society at $13,000 a year, and I was like rolling in the dough.
But it sounds like certainly the mid-late 60s for you were a time of being very politically involved.
Yes.
You're involved in the anti-war movement. You're observing and supportive of the Black Panthers,
right.
And the Young Lords.
Right.
And then the women's movement starts, women's
liberation.
Right. What was your sense of that movement at the time?
I fell right in. It all made sense, and everything was liberating. Everything. The strength that you felt about being involved in, important political stuff, whether it was anti-war or, supporting the Panthers, or it was all very liberating, very freeing, very affirming. And so women's issues, a lot of the groups that, that existed then, from SDS and Weatherman and all of it, they were very kind of male-dominated, though the women were incredibly strong and articulate and forceful. There was still a lot of chauvinism that no one examined. And then as that started to be questioned, it was a real positive step. And so, there were these internal discussions and battles, and that's not important now. There are other things that are more important, and when we solve those issues, then you women can, sort of make your own gripes. But right now, we got to do this, and we were saying no, no, no. And then there were a few women in the groups that I was involved with who were gay, and who began to separate and feel that they were not supported enough within this sort of heterosexual movement. And
the women's liberation movement at the time.
Yeah, and the political movement, where the guys were, and in a sense, some of the work that I was involved with dissolved, for a whole lot of reasons. the machinery of the state certainly, came down heavy to destroy a lot of groups. But it was also it may have been just particular to me, but the group I was in, the men wanted to start armed struggle. And they were going out and buying guns, and they were going upstate to do practice shooting. And it just wasn't for us. And when the townhouse blew up on West 11th Street, that was sort of a wake-up moment for a lot of people. Like, we're not headed in the right direction. Something's gone way haywire. And we got to rethink what our role is and what we're doing and how we think we're going to win this battle. And for me and some of the other women sort of withdrew more and thought, this is not the direction I want to go in, and I don't want to support those activities.
Fascinating. So when Diana Oughton and the other folks from the Weathermen were, when they were making the bombs in the basements and the townhouse blew up on West 11th, or is it 11? Is 18 West 11th or
I forget.
West 18?
No, it was 11th Street, but I don't know the number.
Okay. Do you remember, did you have any stories of experiencing or noticing male chauvinism when you were in the anti-war movement?
Oh, yeah. The guys would talk and pontificate. Women sort of weren't listened to, or, there was a lot of, how we should all be sexually free for their benefit. Stop being uptight and, smash monogamy. All of which sort of serve their own interests. There was a lot of that.
When they would talk about that at the time, did it seem right? Did it seem revolutionary, or did it not hit you right? What was it like?
Some of the people in the movement were so smart. Your brains hurt when you had to listen and figure out what they were saying. They were really smart. And had, great analysis. And I studied, like, when I went to college, when I was older, I studied with Alan Wolfe, and, and so it was like, monogamy does sort of treat women like, you had to grapple with the argument. You couldn't just dismiss it, but somewhere intuitively it felt, I don't know that this is good for me. I don't know that this is what I buy into. So, it took a while for us to sort of figure out what made sense and what didn't, even if the smartest guys in the world were sort of trying to analyze, social structures for us.
For us, right?
Yeah, for us.
The definitive.
Right.
For us. Interesting. So 1970 comes along, and the Weathermen blast happens on West 11th Street. And for you personally, that was, you had the feeling of needing to take a step back?
I started to withdraw, and then in 71 there was something called the Venceremos Brigade. It was basically run, I think, by the Communist Party here in the States. And they chose people, these groups of people, to go down to Cuba, work cutting sugarcane for, I think, 6 weeks. We cut cane in a camp. And then for the last 2 weeks, we traveled around Cuba. We went to the cities, we went to small towns, and got to speak to people. And when I came back from Cuba, something major happened. And I just realized, that's when I realized I have to go back to school. I can't do this running in the streets and handing out leaflets. It's not working. I need real tools. And I withdrew. And everyone was sort of that movement was, I guess, falling apart around then, into the 70s. It was just not sustainable, and Black Panthers were getting shot in Chicago, and, the state was coming down heavy on a whole lot of people, Bobby Seale was bound and gagged at a trial, and, it was horrific. It was horrific times, and movements like the Black Panthers and like SDS and Weathermen, they just sort of ate away at themselves and collapsed under the state's weight and their own weight.
And so your feeling at the time was to regroup personally,
Yeah.
and getting into law would give you
Yeah,
way
that I
to
could do more important political work that way.
Fascinating.
And though when I finally got out of law school, I never worked on any of those political cases. You know, I was just a criminal defense lawyer in Brooklyn working for the Legal Aid Society. I thought my work was important. I thought, however I could muck up the criminal justice system in any way, I was making some kind of contribution. Now, looking back, I'm almost ashamed that I did that work.
How come?
Well, because the whole judicial system was so rotten to the core, and so racist and vile that my being a defense attorney, you know, in these little courtrooms, meant that our presence allowed the wheels of justice to keep turning. If we had refused to participate in that kind of system more and challenged it more, it would have been, I think, more honest. But we thought, okay, we're defending, you know, people who are sort of being charged with stuff that they shouldn't be charged with, and you know, it's a racist world out there. But we operated within a system that wasn't designed by us or wasn't affected by us. You know, that we allowed it, and we should have done so much more to protest how that system runs, bail and all of it. But that's, you know, hindsight.
Sure.
That's
sure.
after.
Well, it sounds like at the time you really felt like you were doing the best you could do.
Yeah, you know, oh yeah, and we were, you know, righteous and working for the right side, and, you know, hated the cops and the DAs, but wasn't enough.
Gotcha. Head back into the 60s again.
Yeah.
What was your involvement, or did you have involvement with the hippie scene?
No, it's just to the extent that I hung out, like, it was more in the 50s. I hung out at Washington Square Park. I went to Hootenannies. I went to every Pete Seeger and Weavers concert that was, raised money for all kinds of causes. You know, I wore Western jackets with the fringes, and so yeah, I mean, I was certainly more identified with kind of the hippie life than being straight. And so, like, when I say I had these terrible jobs in the 60s, you know, that was sort of my job life to make money. And then I went out at night and, you know, met people at coffee houses and bars. And
It sounds like your counterculture was more the beatnik going over into the folk scene.
folk scene, yes, and then the political.
Tell me about Greenwich Village in the 60s, the environment, East and West Village.
I didn't hang out too much in the East Village, and I didn't participate too much in the music scene in the West Village. But it was kind of seedy. But you could always go to a cafe and sit and have coffee for an hour and a half or 2 hours. People would come and go who you knew. Let's meet at, you know, whatever it was. And it was, you know, everyone was sort of doing their own thing and figuring out where they wanted to go and very comfortable with each other. It was all white. It was completely white, as far as I remember.
The counterculture.
And the village scene. I know there was a black jazz scene, and some clubs were black, but, you know, hanging out in Washington Square Park, and can't even remember the names of the coffee houses anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, there was one on the corner of Bleecker and Thompson, I can't remember it. Anyway, that was all white. I was all white, sort of privileged kids. I never went to Woodstock. That wasn't my scene.
Did you feel that the hippie scene was aspirational in good ways?
Yeah, they were, they were fighting the man and go fuck yourself and, authority and cops and, yeah, their hearts were all in the right place, what they did with their lives. It was a moment in time, it was one of those, there were guys who were burning their draft cards and, who you had to support and love, and we were all reading sort of little neighborhood newspapers and,
Which ones?
Well, the Village Voice was really important, and I don't remember the writers, and but I remember women writing for the Village Voice was really militant and great. And then there were all, Black Panthers everybody had their own little newspaper, so.
Young Lord, wasn't it Palante?
Maybe, I don't remember.
Young Lords, like Para Adelante?
Yeah.
I had my own little, I did the Sandinista Nicaragua thing in the early 80s. That was my revolution. If you could give a sense of your view or your sense of gay people in New York in the 60s or wherever you were at certain.
Well, I told you early on, the lesbians frightened me, and the gay boys, I was also sort of alienated from that scene. They were a lot of misogyny and just a world that I was not familiar with, that I had I wasn't drawn to it in some way with the men. And so I sort of, in some ways, was oblivious to, what they were going through and what their fight was about, and didn't appreciate that Queens was sort of the vanguard of the movement, and trannies and cross-dressers were taking the brunt of it. When I went to law school finally, I was friendly with a lot of gay students, lesbian students, and some gay. And they helped educate me a lot about the gay male struggle. And that was a very sort of important and serious development for me, to begin to understand what their struggle was and what it was about, and not be frightened by it. And I really appreciate, the Sylvia Riveras of the world, and how they were so the vanguard of gay struggles.
What's your memory of Stonewall?
Just this horrible riot, and guys who had it, and someone died, and it was this sort of, I lived here, so it wasn't far away.
June of '69?
Yeah, I was living at 55 Leroy Street then, right down the block.
55 Leroy?
Yeah. And then here I moved in 71. So I wasn't a participant. It wasn't like I was involved with the other groups. It was sort of very separate. I don't know how much, the left tolerated gay. There weren't a whole lot of gay guys in any of the organizations I was around, in any of the meetings I went to, any of the demonstrations. They were like almost a hindrance. They'll give us bad names, sort of thing. That's what lesbians were told. Well, we're kind of fighting for the women's rights now. Don't muck it up with your crazy demands. Your creepy gay demands. And I think that that's true of the larger left movement. you know, there were a lot of groups that were macho, and you know, we don't want to hear your issues.
The I asked Jonathan Lerner, the fellow who was a weatherman, and wrote Swords in the Hands of Children, how he viewed Stonewall at the time. And he had two competing things going on, because he's gay, he was not out, and one was, you know, a sense of, well, they should be supported,
Right.
and on the other hand, he was, what was I don't remember the exact word, but he was not sympathetic,
Yeah.
personally.
Right.
He felt like, ugh,
Right.
what are you doing?
Right.
Do you remember your own feeling? You said before that you were oblivious to the scene in general, but at the moment when Stonewall happened, did you have any strong feeling one way or another?
No, and you know, I'm not proud of that, but no, it was like this event that happened in the village, but it was like somebody else's culture, somebody else's struggle. Too bad, you know, or you know, and none of us liked the cops. So you know, when the cops were on the other side, you had to, you know, your loyalties went with whoever was under attack. But it wasn't. I didn't certainly recognize it as this is the beginning of, you know, this is like an important seminal moment in gay struggles. This is something, you know, important is going on here. It didn't hit me that way.
So that whole sort of the swirl of liberation movements, the Vietnamese, the Puerto Rican, the black movement and so on, that didn't seem to catch fire or have the same, not equivalency, but the same gravity.
No, it just was, I wasn't familiar with it, so it wasn't some familiarity. And our movement back then did not welcome gay people. It was just not gay friendly. You know, and there was a lot of sleeping around, a lot of, you know, drama amongst couples, and then some of the lesbians, you know, sort of tried to be heard, and sometimes they succeeded a little, sometimes they didn't. You know, one of them was a woman, Sylvia Baraldini, and she's in federal prison, as far as I know, still, you know, for God knows what.
What's her name?
Sylvia Baraldini.
Baraldini.
She was an Italian woman. She came here, I don't know when, and she got totally involved, and she was tough as nails. I adored her. She would, you know, take on anybody and fight anything. And she got arrested for, I don't even remember what, but something very serious. Some conspiracy to do. She was into the guns. And she was in jail, and she was a dyke, and she was an out dyke, but one of very few. And she was respected because she was so tough, and she bought into the whole armed struggle argument.
You had relations, there were two men you were married to?
Uh-huh.
What years were those?
Oh, here you go. 1964, I was married to a Sicilian, and we divorced about 4 years later. And then in 64, I was married, and we were separated by 1967. And that's when I started getting really involved in more and more politics in New York. I mean, we did some nasty things, you know, we weren't just girls handing out leaflets, you know, we did a lot of disruptive stuff. One of the groups I was involved with, they dedicated themselves to every time Nixon came to New York, whatever hotel he stayed at, we would go and trash, and we would really trash, and, you know, rent a room and completely destroy it, and, you know, leave our message. You know, Nixon go home. So, you know, we did stuff.
I love that. I hope you don't regret that part.
No, I don't. But it's just so useless. But anyway,
No.
it never got any publicity, and it was shit.
When you were with your husbands, was there any sense of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but boy, I'd like to be with a woman.
No.
There's something sexually here that's not quite, or were your sexual
No.
experiences comfortable?
Yeah, no. Nope. Didn't feel it, but I was working my way towards another life. And so, by 60s, not 67, I'm getting my years all confused. Robin and I got together in 1979, and I started working at Legal Aid around 1978. And it was just around then, so the late 70s, I finally came out and totally liberated.
When you came out, did it feel like, oh geez, this is who I am?
Yes, entirely.
So
100%.
It wasn't a matter of, oh, I was with men and I've just, now I feel like I'm with women. And
I was not bisexual, I was not exploring, I was in it.
And it became...
It was Coney Island. Fireworks, I couldn't shut up about it. All my gay women friends, da-da-da-da-da, I'm here, I'm queer, what's next?
I'm here, I'm queer.
Yeah. And I had no regrets. It was like, oh my God, why did this take so long? I've been a jerk, and now I'm not a jerk.
But the way it sounds like what you're saying is that retrospectively you may have seen it as having been the truth all along, but that was just realized.
Yeah, I was very, it was sort of beat out of me by the 50s. It was a very terrifying time, the 50s. It was very, in high school in the 50s, it was very conforming, it's all those sort of, Look magazine and Life magazine of, the housewife in the dress and hubby comes home on the 6:15. So it was a very, it's odd because I was raised this communist kid and I was involved even, certainly in my early teens and earlier, I was involved in sort of commie stuff, and I went to union picket rallies with my grandfather, and so we were not necessarily conforming, or certainly I wasn't, but socially and with my peers, I wanted to fit in. And even then I didn't fit in so much because I was this loudmouth commie, and in high school we had to read Of Mice and Men. And I wrote this scathing critique, that was all about men, and that the woman who's murdered in the book isn't even named, and it's, it's the most macho piece of, and so even my teacher got angry at me, and, so
Your feminist bone was there
yes,
long ago.
oh yeah, and I was a tomboy, I was tough, played handball with the guys, and, Coney Island, and was not a sissy in any way.
Did anybody ever suggest that they thought that you were gay or a dyke or any of those terms?
No, I was often called a tomboy. You're such a tomboy, which I didn't mind. And my uncle remembers me when I was like maybe 5 or 6. There was this lot next to, empty sort of dirt lot next to our house where the boys used to play marbles. I mean, we're talking now 1940s, 1947, 46, and they would play marbles. And I used to go over, and they didn't want me to join in because I was a girl, and I used to beat them up, and so I had those sensibilities.
It's yours is an interesting you know, coming out, in many ways similar to hearing about other women who had been part of the anti-war movement, and just felt after a while, I don't want to make the coffee and get the
Right.
flyers made
Right.
for you. And how that had them, the liberation that was not yet articulated was their own.
Right.
As the 70s go on, so it's 1978,
Yeah.
you come out.
Yeah.
Did you go to the march in 1979 on Washington, the first gay march?
No,
Did you know about it?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I was too. By then, in '79, Robin and I had just met. February of '79. She lived in Boston. A friend of mine who's now fighting bed bugs in California was up in Boston and asking me to guest teach a class, criminal law class that she was teaching. I went up there to do this thing. Robin came over to the house. We instantly connected. A few months later, she was down here, living here in this building. And a few months after that, I was pregnant with our first kid. So '79 was personal life, just catching up, you know, living, loving, getting, you know, making a family. We were just like in the throes of it.
But we went to the march, I remember. We went to, I probably shouldn't be doing this. We went to the march that first spring here in New York. That I do remember.
Okay.
Because it had a huge impact on me.
Talk about that. You mean the first June? Of
June.
79?
Yeah.
Yeah,
The first gay pride march.
Yeah.
right.
And it was in
Together. Okay.
Yes, and we went to that together. And then we had kids, and we used to take them every year. We went to the Christopher Street March until they were, I don't know how old. They were sitting in strollers, at first. And we went for a whole bunch of years.
Do you remember the first one also?
Not clearly, no.
it was the sheep meadow. That's where the rally was.
Uh-huh.
And that's the part I remember.
It was in the
And I remember bumping into a friend as we were marching into the sheep meadow.
Uh-huh.
It was the reverse. It went uptown instead of downtown.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I remember marching downtown in Roll Arena, coming and on her skates and roller skates and with her wand and everything, saying hello.
And then there were dykes on bikes leading it. Oh my God, that was the best.
At the time in the late 70s, what was your sense of the gay community, the men and the women? There were some splits there at the time.
Yeah. I was never active quite in the gay community. Later on, I got involved for a short time with ACT UP. A friend of mine was involved, and I went to meetings at the center and stuff. But I didn't, we were one of the first couples that had kids, and we were very much discriminated against. All the dykes that were friends of ours sort of petered away because we couldn't come out and play at night, and we couldn't, and we were sort of homebodies with our kids, and so there was some tension. Also,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Also, that case that we went through really pit us against the male gay community. They went after us like nobody's business. I don't know if you know a guy by the name of Art Leonard. He's a lawyer. He published for years and years sort of the Gay Law Journal, all the cases for the last month, or I don't know how frequently he published it, but he would, compile all these legal cases and keep abreast of the law as it affected gay people, and they were just vicious with us when our case was being litigated. So as far as the men went, by that time, this was when 1995, that's when it was over. 1991, I guess.
Could you just describe the case a little bit?
Both Robin and I used different gay men as donors for our kids. and the donor who gave Robin, his sperm, later sued us when our youngest daughter was 9. I had a baby first, then Robin did. And when the little one was 9 and Katie was like 10, 11, he sued us for paternity. And I don't want to go into the case. It was long and involved, but it was this absolute attack on a lesbian family. It was unbelievable. And he was a fairly well-known attorney in California, so he was able to sort of generate a lot of publicity about it. I was fairly well-known here in New York. I was a gay lawyer. I was involved in, there was a women's gay organization for a while, and I don't know if I was active in Legal yet. There was a legal gay organization here in New York that I was part of for a while. And I had to divorce myself from all of that in order to protect our family. So that was an atypical wrinkle, but it was very, I want to say indicative, or very, it was a sort of a perfect example of how gay men and gay women, we were not yet friends. We were not yet real compadres, that the men were still very misogynist and very feeling entitled. And especially, I know this sounds awful, but especially because of AIDS as well, that, we're dying, we're the, we're the forgotten ones, we're the ones that the state, the government is doing nothing about, that anger, which is totally makes sense, but it somehow also didn't leave room for women. We're fighting for our lives now with the gay men. If you want to come and join us, fine. And there was Ann Northrup and other women that were, incredibly involved. And, but I don't know if it was just, it wasn't just our case. It wasn't just the particular man who sued us. It was and a lot of lesbians, sided with them, were very male identified in a way, and went along with that scenario. Yeah, he's entitled. And it was like, so there was this huge rupture with my family and the rest of the gay world. Up until now, it continues.
How does it continue?
We're not involved in gay organizations a whole lot. My kid is. One of my daughters is gay, and she's very active. And she's active in gay AA, and she's at a meeting tonight at the center for an AA meeting. But we withdrew. We have individual lesbian friends, some of them who go way back, but we're not really involved in any kind of gay politics. We're now involved in, more mainstream politics. Hillary, Obama. Now we're fighting locally here. We have a house out on Long Island. We're trying to get rid of that.
Where's the house on Long Island?
It's on the North Fork in Cutchogue. And the representative for that area is, a disgusting pig who supports Trump. So we're trying to organize around a Democratic candidate, to take back the House. So that's the kind of stuff we're involved with.
Were you a Bernie fan?
No, I thought Bernie was stone deaf to the black movement, and I didn't appreciate his position. And so we were, not that Hillary is not pure, but I thought he was really deaf to the demands of the black movement, and should have been supporting Hillary more, probably, first woman.
Certainly in the last few months, right?
Yeah, he didn't do enough with his, and he had a pack of boys, They were the bros for Bernie.
Bernie bros.
Yeah, who were very similar to some of the bros for Make America Great Again. You know, there was a lot of overlap that he was attracting, you know, and I distrusted some of it.
It's off course a little bit, but the Roseanne show's coming back on.
Yeah.
And her politics were quite left, and it's such a surprise that she went Trump, and she voted for
Yeah,
Trump.
I know.
And somebody said to her, "Why would you vote for Trump?" And she said, "You should be happy we have Trump, because now at least we don't have Hillary Clinton." There's an oral history.
I guess.
Right?
Yeah, but the whole family, we used to watch Roseanne every week. We loved it, you know. The kids, we'd like, oh, it was like our favorite show. So yeah,
It's one of those. Yeah, it remains
people
to be
change.
seen.
But all these movements, you know, I guess starting with the student and anti-war movement, and then the civil rights movement, obviously, you know, in the '60s, and the March on Washington, and they just all fed each other, you know, like inspired different groups to announce their cause. And so nothing I fell into or got involved with was hermetically sealed. It was all a part of everything else, you know, that we found a cause and a voice and a sense of righteousness came, you know, from other groups doing the same thing, from the civil rights group, you know, that was sort of, I guess, the mainspring of so much of this, you know, was the Martin Luther King and marches on Washington, and then Black Power.
Do you feel that those movements that seem to all be gelling, would overlap with one another, influenced Stonewall and the gay movement that came after it?
Oh, probably. I mean, I assumed that whatever was going on in the gay movement was a part of everything else that was going on. You know, each group proclaiming their rights and being fed up with the oppression that they lived with. Now I see it more. I mean, now it's clearly, you know, intersectional, you know, that women's rights are black rights, or, you know, are disabled rights, or, you know, everyone recognizes that we're in this boat together. And that didn't exist then in the 70s. That sense of we're all in this together. You know, it's not who should. There was a hierarchy, you know, black struggles, then Latino struggles, then, you know, the grape workers, and, you know, and then women's rights, and maybe gay somewhere, you know. We don't see them yet. But there was really this hierarchy. You know, it wasn't unlike, you know, suffrage with, well, you know, let's get the vote, you know, should we get the vote for blacks or women, or, you know, it was always this division. That existed in the 70s, those divisions. And now I think it's much broader and much more inclusive. So that you can't go to the Women's March and just be marching there for women's rights. You know, everybody was there. You know, everyone. Men, women, you know, teachers' rights, you know, you name it. You know, every conceivable group was there and supportive of each other. And it was incredible. It was incredible. And that's how you got a crowd that way. Also Obama coming in, just, you know, I know it's illusory, and I know that we're stuck with Trump now, but it did sort of inspire people to keep going, you know, to not give up, and to, you know, we're getting somewhere somehow. I know we have this awful nightmare now, but, you know, and we have this election last night.
I stayed up only till 11.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm with you. When Obama, you know, it's interesting because, and I'm off subject a little bit, but when Michelle Obama said, "This is the first time I've been proud of this country," and then she got mauled.
Right.
And by
I remember it.
white Democrats as well.
Right.
That was the first time I felt proud to be an American.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, sorry, but I was
They took such shit. It was unbelievable that how he conducted himself. He was just a prince,
He really was.
you know. So the hope is, you know, people are waking up. The kids all marched out today.
How do you feel about the new generation?
I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled. You know, all these movements are started by youth. You know, it was the youth in the civil rights movement sitting at those goddamn lunch counters and on riding those buses. And, you know, it was the youth in Ferguson who had it. And now it's, you know, the youth who, you know, are fighting this gun violence crap. And I just think it's miraculous. And I think that's where the hope is. I think they're finding their voice. And, you know, all power to the people, as they say.
It's a relief, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's wonderful.
The only thing that gets me sometimes is the speech stuff. You know, having to cherry pick every single word unless
Right.
you say something
Right.
incorrect. It's
Right.
like, whoa. But I have a number of participants who are millennials who have given me what are now different views on free speech, critique on the free speech movement. Free speech for who?
Right.
Who's privileged to have free
Right.
speech and on
Right.
and on. But still, I have the old free speech thing. In
Right.
there. Let me just say, how long have we been going?
It's already 1 hour. 1 hour.
Okay, all right.
Continue.
Did you stop it?
No.
Oh, okay. I think one of the things that Robert had spoken to me about, and given a blurb about you, was your involvement in the 60s protest movements. And I think we got a really kind of wonderful view of your involvement then. And as a woman feeling like moving away from some of the craziness and then regrouping for yourself. And then the kind of not totally in touch with the gay aspect of
Right.
yourself until years go by. But that being in process and your view of Stonewall is very interesting and very honest.
Right.
And we need that.
Right.
We need honesty.
Right.
And I get that. I get it completely. You know, when I'm evaluating where movements have been, and then I think to myself how my own process of coming out. To this day, there'll be times where I closet myself depending on where I am and what I'm thinking. You know,
Right.
it's either self-preservation or it's also a little, you know, I have the detritus of self-homophobia at times.
Right.
You know, I hate admitting that,
Right.
right? But voila.
We weren't quite as able to do that because we had kids. And so there was no way you could be in the closet when you have kids.
Interesting.
Because then you just pass on some sort of shame or,
Yeah.
you know, and you just had to stand up for them and be,
Interesting.
you know, and be out.
Yeah.
We went to a conference several years ago, up in Binghamton or something. It was some lesbian with kids conference. And some of the women were saying, well, we can't be out. You know, their kids go to school and we can't be out because, you know, Junior will, you know, it'll be too hard on us and on the kids. And I just didn't get it, you know. It was like, you know, the only way to fight homophobia is for everybody to be out. I used to read Signorelli. Do you remember him?
Michael.
Oh, I read him, Out magazine, every week. He was Out Week, was it? He was the greatest. We read his articles, you know, like we chewed on them. They were so great. And he always was making the point is, you got to be, you know, everybody has to come out so we can all come out. You know, it's enough. Can't be in the closet. It's not going to work.
Yep. I'm 90% there. I just, you know, every now and then I'll probably be like, oh God, where did that old homophobic phone?
See, I feel like it took me so long to come out, like I can't waste a moment, you know? I lived all these other years sort of, I don't know, with blinders on or something, and now it's just, I am who I am, you know, take it or leave it.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add to the discussion this evening? Anything I didn't ask you?
No, I can't think of it.
Okay. Then I guess we can turn it off.